have us approve the last meeting summary. And I'll just note that Catherine Fleming sent some corrections to her own statements that she made. It was regarding the conversation with C. Terrence and her thoughts around philanthropic groups. So just want to note that staff will make that edit.
Yeah. So one question I had on the minutes from last time, and I think this was part of the conversation. We went through a couple of the bullet points on the draft report, right? Wasn't that the last meeting, or was that not the last meeting?
Yeah, no, we did. We went through the findings for the 6 goals.
Yep. Okay. So, and maybe I just missed it, but oh, actually, you're right. Okay, I got it. Sorry, I just want to make sure that was included in there, which it is. So I apologize. So with that, do we want to approve? Do we have anyone that wants to make a motion to approve the minutes from the last meeting?
I'll approve the minutes with the corrections that Kathleen raised.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, thank you. So we approve the minutes with the updates that Catherine sent in, correct? Catherine. Cool. So do you want to handle this part, Sophia, or do I? Because I'm already a chair.
Sure, I can take it away. So it's not. So obviously, Jason is a wonderful chair, and he is continuing in his role. But his co-chair, Philippe Sosa, stepped down from the committee. He's a Golden Valley resident, and as this project has gotten more solidified, less maybe related to his endeavors. So we are down a co-chair. And, Jason does a wonderful job, but just like tonight, where he has a conflict, it'd be really awesome if he had some backup. And, we have really awesome co-chair check-ins and, kind of talk about everything. Pretty cool to hang out with the two of us and help plan this meeting. CMC is also a pretty cool place to go. We don't have to decide it tonight if people need to think about it for a moment, but if there's any immediate interest in helping out our friend Jason, please let us know. Jean, were you volunteering? And we can't hear you. So I was, yes? Yes, okay. Is there anyone else that is interested, or would somebody like to move Jean as our new co-chair?
And Jean is interested?
Yeah. Sorry.
Hey, Rogers. Yeah, I think it'd be great.
Okay.
Jason and I get along well. We are totally in line with everything that's going on. It would be nice if somebody else wants to do it. Go for it.
I'm not hearing a ton of people, so I'll move that Jean to be our co-chair.
Great. Do we need a second, or does that?
Yeah, if the committee could just say aye, that'd be great. I mean, you don't need to do the formal process with this. It's more consensus, but it's just nice to know that there was agreement among those in attendance. Aye from Adam. Thank you. I'm getting folks doing thumbs up both on their video and with their reaction. So I'm going to take that as we are all good with Jean filling it. Thank you, Jean, for stepping up. It's really really good. We will get you on the CMC meeting invites. Obviously, you probably weren't preparing it for this month. And Jason's usually there to give an update, but you guys can figure it out for future months as well. And we'll have a chair check-in. So okay. If everybody's ready, the rest of the agenda tonight is to review the comments received on the draft report. Myself and Dan will kind of cover that, and then the second item is to hear from Terrence Anderson, who's already on the call, about the work of the Anti-Displacement group. Sound good to everybody? Cool. Okay. So we released a draft report on December 13th, and there was a 45-day comment period plus holidays. So that ended on January 25th. And what I'm going to do tonight is just kind of give you a summary of what we heard, as well as how that fits in with each of the project goals. So if we think about the next round of reports and why we got public feedback, was to see if how we're analyzing these goals, what the community had to say about that. So that will be the framework of kind of the presentation tonight. So we got comments from a variety of different sources. We had a comment form online. We got 132 responses. There's people could email in. Got about 13 of those. We got letters from each of the cities along the line, as well as Maple Grove. And then we've had this interactive map, and really want to highlight that because the community engagement cohort has really used it as a tool to get the broader public comfortable with commenting on the project. So we still got a bunch of comments that way, almost 300. And then we had a series of open houses in each city, both in person and virtual. And while our overall attendance at the open houses was greater than 55 comments, 55 people decided to write something down and submit it to us. So in the virtual events, that was through the chat. In person, that was comment forms or post-it notes. On the interactive map, I just want to break down a little bit of like where those comments went, because we get asked that a bunch of like, we got all these comments on the map. What were people commenting on? A little bit in the visuals, just easier to kind of show. But most of the comments, so over 100 on Lowry and over 80 on West Broadway, the majority of those 300 comments. We did get a bunch in Brooklyn Park, about a dozen in Crystal, about 50 in Robinsdale, and then some were just, as you can see, by the random dot in St. Anthony. Also some that went beyond the borders of the project. Often those were about desiring various connections in the future. So it's not completely, random. Okay, so we're gonna do a little bit of overall theme, and then I'll get into the specific goals. And so some of the things that we heard kind of pretty consistently through a lot of the comments was this need for efficient transit options. And that came out in a variety of ways, but overall this kind of people speaking to how the transit system could work best for them. Whether that was a Crystal resident thinking about how they could get into downtown, a North Minneapolis resident thinking about the stops that they would need to reach their various destinations, et cetera, et cetera. So kind of that gamut of things. I got a lot of support in the comments, particularly about making decisions that support a route selection that serves folks that don't have cars and really want to use transit. And then a whole slew of comments, and they fit into the goals in various ways, about the need for related support facilities. So bike lanes, safe pedestrian connections, whatnot. Those were comments that we received throughout all. I would actually say that was one of the biggest things that throughout all cities and all places, a very consistent theme, and it's something that needs to get addressed as we continue through design. Was how does the buses relate? How do people access things safely? All of that kind of stuff. I mean, we as a group have talked about that, and obviously an area that we will really have to hone into as we develop and design, because we heard that loud and clear and have heard it throughout the year. And there's just a bunch of comments. We really, as part of this, sometimes commenting on an official report can feel kind of daunting. So in our conversations with community, we even encourage folks like, hey, if all you want to say is I want this route or I want this to happen, like one sentence that we can feed into the report, we welcome those comments as well. So we got a good amount of comments that were very simple, just expressing general support and kind of maybe a little bit of a why for one option or the other. Then we got a bunch of comments that were related to folks wanting more information, and this is kind of a lot of what we'll continue to dig into as we get prepare the next round, the next round of report. And it's things from travel time to just various details of how we would do things equitably and whatnot. That'll kind of continue throughout. To just kind of break up kind of where comments kind of came in and kind of how they're bucketed. About 7% were folks saying, I want more information about XYZ. About 11% commented on the transit itself, so wanting efficient, well-connected transit, so talking about the benefit of the line itself. About 29% of the comments were destination specific. So, I tripping over my words. Is somebody saying something like, "It's important. I support XYZ because it reaches this destination." Like, for example, North Memorial Hospital, or something like that. And then what I said before, kind of 14% was in other investments that folks wanted to see with the LRT. And then about 17% was thinking about minimizing impact. So bringing up an impact that people saw and asking us to find ways to minimize it or evaluate it, moving it forward.
Can I ask a quick question about that, Sophia?
Sure.
So I just have, at the meetings that I've been to, I know a lot of times it's like hard to get people, well, sometimes it's really easy, like in just having a conversation, it's easy to get them to communicate, but it's hard to get them to like fill out the forms. And you had mentioned like the Post-it notes, and I know project staff does a lot of like talking and then filling out the Post-it notes. Like, is there, do those numbers in the previous slide, does that represent like the things that project staff has written in conversation, or and like, is that every Post-it note, or is that just the notes that like came directly from residents and people that were at these meetings?
So this last round, we did less Post-it note comments. Just it depends, but Post-it note comments, even if project staff are writing them, you're not just writing them and sticking them on a board.
Yeah.
You're like, hey, this is what you said, right? And sticking it on. So this round, very few Post-it notes came through. We were just answering a lot of questions. So sometimes that you don't get a chance to do the Post-it notes. Most of them were written comments. A lot of them were also comments in chat.
So Sophia,
Okay.
I have a question.
Yes.
So with regards to the last comment that you just made, the bucket list that you just made, it was related to, now I'll bastardize the language, but talking about addressing issues that people brought up, making sure that we think about that as we progress. Compare that to a couple of the comments that I read that, quite frankly, I raise my eyebrows and go, really, this person really doesn't understand that the light rail is not going to separate the city between north and south. I mean, physically, yeah, but it's not going to create this permanent fissure that is not crossable. So comments that are made that are really subjective and maybe give an indication that somebody doesn't really understand how things could work. Do we rephrase those and put them in a positive way, or do we bucket those as negative comments?
So that's a good example of a kind of comment where, how do I put this? Like, we take it as a challenge, right? Is that people are not, maybe they don't have experience with a light rail system, or they don't, or they envision University Avenue, but they don't know what it was like before.
Right.
And understand how closer the street feels, or how easier the pedestrian improvements that occurred. And so while that might not be something that we it's thinking about how in the report we can speak to these issues of what's at the root of that comment, right? Connectivity, community cohesion, things like that. So yeah, and maybe the best way to answer that is almost what you said, right? It's not necessarily spinning the positive, but it's giving the kind of facts to community about how that. Well, you don't want to blow off a worry, right? But talking about kind of walking people through that process, because it's it comes up in multiple places, right? Of how that would work, and there are places where we need to develop design more, like where are we have signalized intersections, but are there other places, like especially when you get into the Minneapolis area, that you'd need mid-block crossings or things like that, where we haven't where we're still refining to answer those.
Hey, Sophia, I'd like to add into that because I think what Rogers brings up is a good point. I read all the comments. There's a lot of friggin' comments, and you can take all of them and you can put them in little buckets, little packets, whatever you want to call them, where people in all different neighborhoods and areas, concerns, had similar concerns, similar positive feedback, and similar I really don't know because I don't have the information. Is there any way that you could look at all of that data, put it into groups of I don't like this for this reason, or I like it for this reason, and give some feedback so we can get some answers to give to our residents in our areas about what is going to be done? Because just getting comments is great, and doing a graph and chart and Pareto chart is wonderbar, but people want answers. So have you ever thought about doing that?
Yeah,
sure,
maybe,
Gene.
maybe even creating fact sheets that could be distributed to help clear those confusions up.
Very, very much so, and especially for some of the themes that we've heard kind of consistently throughout the year, really kind of speaking to how we can address them, when they can be addressed, right? Because another thing is we don't have all the answers right now, but we can explain a little bit more where in the process some of that also occurs. This is an aside, but gives an example of something that I was talking with somebody today about is, for some folks, we were at 90% design. And so there's even this misconception that, well, we'll figure out these other parts of the routes and then we'll just start construction, right? But there's all this environmental process and design work and station area planning and all this kind of stuff that has to kind of come along with this project before we're at that point again. So the staff's first cut of some of the comments was really to how to advance to our next release of a route modification report and really tying that into the goals. But it also gives our team themes, right, of things that we need to continue to talk about. And I would say that, especially where you hear across communities, like Jean mentioned, right, like pedestrian safety, whether you're in Brooklyn Park, Crystal, Robinsdale, or Minneapolis, people want to know about pedestrian safety. So talking about that process. That great feedback. I think that our team can continue to think about putting together more resources for folks. We actually have a kind of a one-pager, maybe it won't be more than one pager, kind of in the works, somewhat for that purpose. Any other questions or feedback for us, the things we should consider? Okay, I'll dive into it more. I'm sure there'll be much more to talk about. So kind of how I have it set up is we'll hit on the goal and then we'll hit on kind of per place in the corridor. Some have more comments than others. So to goal one, the basics of improve transit actions and connections to jobs and regional destinations. Things that kind of came up overall was the need for LRT to kind of integrate with our transit system, and exploring that more into the future. And one of the kind of comments too is that Lowry and West Broadway both are good transit routes. So how would you serve the route that's not selected? Going in a little bit to Area 1, folks talking about park and rides being walkable, and kind of the connection to that broader world up in Brooklyn Park being to have those connections. Crystal, we got a lot of comments about traffic, as similar in downtown Robinsdale, and just folks talking about serving the businesses and then connections to neighborhoods, and whatnot. For
So
Lowry,
can I say one thing on that one, Sophia?
Sure.
Just because I was at one of the main meetings in at Elam Church in Robinsdale, and I know that as it relates to jobs, one of the big questions that kept coming up that people were asking about was like the nature of traveling to work has changed, and that not to suggest that transit isn't needed, but people were definitely asking like, hey, so many people are working in a hybrid environment or remotely, that like as it relates to connections to jobs and specifically to like downtown Minneapolis, that the nature of that work and that travel has changed. And it didn't really seem like that got mentioned, but I heard a lot of people talk about it in that meeting.
Sure. So maybe to talk about that a little bit, is we do have to remember that not all jobs can be done remotely, and part of not even so much this goal, but some of our equity considerations are all of us right now get to sit virtual, and that's a luxury. Not all jobs, especially in even those in healthcare, right, that are been shepherding us through this pandemic, cannot be virtual. So there's a lot of people that have stayed on our transit network because they will always go into physical spots, and then having express routes might we might not have as much 9 to 5. Our daily rides. Jason, I see you shaking your head, so I can stop.
No, I totally agree with you. I guess I just feel like it was one of the big, like that was something that just kept getting asked, and it's not included as something that was even talked about on the sheet. So I'm not expecting you to, like, I get why we need transit. That's what I'm saying. Like, I understand. I'm just saying that, like, to me, that felt like a large theme of the conversation, and it isn't represented in what was like the feedback from Goal 1 in Robinsdale.
Okay. So you're saying that you think that the changing nature of work should be represented on access to job in connections to jobs.
Yeah, I mean, just as far as like what was talked about in Robinsdale, that to me felt like one of the biggest things. So I feel like that should be something that is reflected to, like, if anybody looks at this presentation or the CMC, like that came up as a conversation. It isn't to say that there isn't, I mean, to your point exactly, there's a lot of people that can't work remotely and they have to use transit to get to where they need to go. So it doesn't mean like that. I guess, I don't know, there's like positive and negatives. It's just more of like what was covered in the meeting. And I haven't been to every meeting, but I was at that one. So
yeah, and I would say that this is meant to be a summary. It's not necessarily comprehensive. So open to feedback of other major buckets.
okay.
If you read the comments, what Jason is saying is correct. But the fact is that the light rail serves everybody in all communities, and not everybody's going to really agree with everything. But the concerns about how this is going to be implemented, people just want more information. And if we can give them a little more clear idea of information, I think all of these naysayers and negative people will come online, because the bottom line is that the whole project is a good project, but we need to address the concerns of all communities that are represented and making comments, and they're all kind of about the same.
Thanks, Gene.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree, Sophia, that especially in suburban communities, Crystal, Robinsdale, and even in Brooklyn Park, certainly the common theme of one of the questions was, do we really need to continue to move forward on a major transit project based on how the nature of work has changed today? Now, we know we may have 15 different answers to that question, right? I would have never guessed, 2 years ago that people working at home like they're working would be a real thing. And 3 years from now, am I going to still be sitting in my kitchen, or are we going to be doing something completely different? We don't know, right? We don't know. But I think what I'm hearing is it might ought to be reflected somewhere in a common theme that, work and travel patterns changing, and the issue of how that impacts this project is a thing.
We'll get to it later, but I think it's forgetting goal 3 or 4 when you talk sometimes about the cost of the project. That's where we had kind of put a lot of those comments, like when we were going through them and bucketing them, because the interpreting it as kind of, is this project worth the dollars in a sense, given XYZ. But yeah, so noted, Jason.
Thank you.
Okay, so I love the conversation. So people keep jumping in. It actually makes it so I don't feel like I'm just talking all the time. Because part of where we want to have discussion too is, and I actually queued this up. Jason and I talked about this, is as we're going through these comments, if you think that there's something that has been important to your community that maybe didn't get reflected as much in this last round of comments, that you think the project staff should be really paying attention to, that's part of the conversation that would be really beneficial today. Okay, so this first bullet on Lowry is a good example of how you sometimes get contradictory comments. So folks, writing in, for example, that an opportunity would be that stations east of 94 could provide access to underdeveloped areas around the river. So kind of that idea that maybe that would spur a change and be an opportunity. You have another commenter writing in something along the lines of the locations between I-94 and the river is mostly residential, and or industrial, and there's little residential, and access is difficult. So that's it's sometimes really interesting to see that dichotomy and the things that people are thinking about. And to kind of go more into that, people bringing up things like the serving zero-car households, destinations that you could reach, and the opportunity to bring more businesses to the area. Concerns, again, pedestrian crossings and how that all works, and a little bit of that along Washington, that you may be bypassing some of the heart of the community. For West Broadway, and kind of goal 1, people noting that an opportunity is that West Broadway is a vibrant place of cultural and economic corridor. There's many destinations where people are trying to reach. So if you think about your improving of transit, and kind of concerns, thinking, a little bit of, again, that pedestrian safety comment coming through, right? People mentioning that, if getting late in the day, sorry folks, you're concerned about how traffic operates today. And as you put the station in place, is it a friendly environment to walk to? So comments along those themes. Going to goal 2, which is you're improving your frequency and reliability of transit service in the corridor, kind of getting that switch to that metro network, right, that we've been talking about so much, is overall people there's a mixed feedback about kind of elevated track in various places, whether that was Robinsdale or Minneapolis. Some saying like, oh, I'm for sure don't do that, or others kind of commenting, hey, can you continue to look at this? In Crystal, when you think of more of the reliability of transit, folks noting where they wanted to get metro-wide, whether it was downtown or beyond. And then a little bit, Jason, here's a little bit of LRT kind of, or Jean brought this up already, the concern about LRT kind of having this splitting effect, or no, Ken brought this up about the splitting effect on the community and emergency responses and all that kind of stuff. Also got comments of support in the desire to see an improvement upon the existing bus network. Moving into the Minneapolis area, the kind of talking about the ability to improve the efficiency of transit from what the existing conditions, the people commenting about congestion, and then concerns about kind of as you get into the downtown area, if folks are more familiar with the 10th area and the North Loop, folks commenting on traffic or narrow right-of-ways, and concerned about what that would look like in the future. On the West Broadway route, folks were commenting on how it feels like both an efficient route to reach places that they want to go in North Minneapolis, as well as just an overall efficient route. And again, where we have signals and worried that signals would slow down the train. So how does that frequency and reliability work with that? So this is where we would bucket, I think, goal 3, which is provide transit improvement that maximize transit benefits while being cost competitive and economically viable. This is where staff put a lot of those comments about, is this investment really worth it? And people have a variety of reasons, right? Like some that are, generally overall that LRT is a bad use of taxpayer dollars, or ridership is down, why are you still doing this kind of bucket. And so to kind of pull that out, we just pulled a couple examples of, it's particularly in Crystal and Robinsdale that there's been roadway work that's occurred. So thinking about the use of those dollars, or even on a West Broadway or Lowry where you haven't had as many recent roadway improvements, still the idea that you're basically doing a curb to curb reconstruction, people are challenging the use of funds on that. So this is that bucket, right? Is kind of considering costs of a major investment such as this. In goal 4, supporting community development goals, a lot of opportunities of folks writing in. So in Brooklyn Park, we heard a lot about the future of transit-oriented development and desire for opportunities. Along Lowry, a lot of conversation about expanding kind of the business node that exists there today. And then there's a few areas of vacant property and people asking for affordable housing and a focus on that. In the West Broadway area, this is where we put this kind of, some of these questions went to the destinations and things like this, but we're also theming out that people are expressing that this is an important commercial corridor, and that existing businesses could benefit from both their employees or potential customers having the light rail. With an opportunity, but also kind of a make sure project office thing, is that ensure development along this very important commercial corridor supports small businesses that are there. Oh, I hear waving.
No, I have
Jason's
to
leaving.
go, so I'm gonna head out. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, Jason.
Bye.
and that the work that we do really supports the businesses that are there and grows wealth within the community. So kind of lots of comments around big development versus being intentional about supporting the initiatives that community is engaged in. Goal 5, with promoting healthy communities and sound environmental practice. This is where we would put a lot of the kind of ped safety connections piece. So prioritizing bikes and peds to get to stations. We got a few comments about like consider EV charging stations near stations and ensuring safety for our riders and community. Also, this was a place where we kind of bucketed comments about reflecting the neighborhood and the design of our stations themselves. A little bit to the specific cities. This is also where we kind of put bucketed specific requests. So whether that was pedestrian bridges or concern about particularly amenities like North Memorial and noise and things like that were part of our comments. In the Lowry West Broadway area, kind of that conversation about saving money, preventing emissions, how all of that could really reach community goals of things like improving air quality and whatnot. And again, the walkability factor, right? If we're thinking about healthy communities and what makes communities healthy, the ability to reach our station safely. Going to goal 6, and that's advancing local and regional equity and working to reduce racial disparities. So some comments about how North Minneapolis deserves investment in both routes, and then also kind of where we've also put some of our where people are talking about our anti-displacement initiatives and making sure that what we do doesn't lead to displacement. For West Broadway in particular, and I'd say in goal 6, we mainly got a lot of comments more in the Minneapolis area. There was folks commenting on opportunities for investment, some folks mentioning that being closer to the previous alignment, and then kind of on the concern side of things like parking, right? Would that impact your businesses and not wanting to see that, right? If you're trying to reduce disparity, losing businesses would not be part of that goal. And then also kind of what opportunities are there with vacant properties or ones that are owned publicly. Okay, before I turn it over to Dan to talk a little bit about the comments that we received from the city, is there discussion among the committee about what anything else that you would really want project staff to be paying attention to as we work on the next round of reports?
So this
might be an answer or question to Dan, but there was some word about having that bridge going over Robinsdale. Is that feasible? Can we do that?
A pedestrian bridge?
Yeah.
Yeah, Dan can feel free to take that if he wants, but it's something that we've definitely looked at.
I'm not sure, Gene. You mean a pedestrian bridge that goes over 81 between east and west?
Yes.
Sure, it's feasible. It can be built. Now the question becomes, does it need, the grades are such that, it really works nice on one side and it can lead right into it, but then on the other side it's even taller, or if it starts down low and was a bit of a tunnel underneath, it could go over. You can't make the difficulty with a pedestrian bridge is that while a pedestrian bridge can help, like for example, a pedestrian bridge over a freeway can be difficult to use and still get used, because otherwise you can't cross the freeway.
Yeah.
Right? But if you can cross the street at grade, and building a pedestrian bridge makes it more difficult to cross, because you've either got to go way up in the air, or you've got to, use a whole bunch of switchbacks to get up. You can't just have steps. Then all of a sudden, the feasibility starts to go down. We're looking at ways that we might be able to build a usable pedestrian facility, and where crossing West Broadway that makes the most sense. That will be a continued part of our design as we go forward. So it's a challenge. It's not simple. If you can use the grades of the adjoining areas to help with that, it's always best, and that's what we're going to try to do. I thought Ken had a question too, Sophia.
Yeah. So my question is, and I'm not sure that I heard this in public comments, but, and there's a question embedded in this as well. So in my mind, in my mind, the light rail makes the most sense. But I worry that nobody's brought up the fact that there's going to be winners and losers along the line in terms of businesses, maybe even existing businesses. If they're not close to a station, they don't gain the advantage of having foot traffic necessarily brought to their front door. And I know this has a little bit to do with how close the stations are. What about a business in the middle of two stations that is seen as taking a hit because now there's less foot traffic being driven there? There's still an argument that can be made that there's still foot traffic that's possible, but people have to walk a little bit. So I'm surprised there haven't been any comments regarding that. It's mostly been, from what I think what I remember reading, is mostly advantageous to the development of business through the corridor. But is that really true? Is that borne out on Green Line? And then my question, kind of mixed in there, is transit-oriented development. Is that throughout the entire corridor, even in between stations? Is that seen an uptick generally on light rail projects? Or is it just mostly around the stations where there's added foot traffic?
So that's a complex question, and maybe some of the ways to tackle that is, you often see the intensity of development closest to your stations. You take, for example, like our Southwest project that is under construction, but still has a lot of planned development happening around it. You take like a Blake Road, right, and there's going to be a lot right at the station that is occurring. I think the way to parse some of it out too is where the different contexts that you're in. So in some places like a West Broadway, you're in a very dense urban area where you have businesses basically the whole length. Whereas different parts of the corridor, kind of like when you're traveling in North Robinsdale into Crystal, there's more nodes of activity. And so, I would take that question a little bit, and we're in these more dense areas where you do want all this walkability, what does that walk shed look like? And how does that overlap look? And I think that is because the staff has prepared a lot of kind of walk shed data in our initial analysis, especially for looking at the goals of, who is served by each kind of potential station area. And also note, we don't have our stations fully placed, right? So how they end up getting placed within these station study areas that we have. Well, we have options. There's some area. It's a good place for us to lean into and kind of look at more, because if I think there's a lot of overlap in some of our station areas, but if there's kind of there's places, that's an issue that staff can try to tackle and look at further as we advance the project.
Sure. Thank you for that. And this also reminds me of a great takeaway I think we learned from the Green Line project about construction mitigation. There was a lot of concerted effort in working with businesses during construction to try to mitigate the deficiencies that construction would impact their walk-in clientele. And I realize University Avenue is a very different animal than what we're looking at on the Blue Line extension. It lends itself to helping create a stronger backdoor entrance in parking lots for some of those businesses as a mitigation effort to try to reduce the impact that a company might be experiencing because of the construction. I would hope that we look towards something like that, especially in the highly densely business areas or business corridors.
For sure. I mean, that's part of what we got to do is pick where we're going to be, and then through our environmental process, as well as kind of further design, those are the kind of things that we need to tackle. Kind of on the back end of the project staff this past year, we've talked about how on the technical side, we have issue identification teams, right? As we've looked at these routes, as we've gone through things, we're kind of trying to identify what are our issues. As we move into the next kind of couple years, that switch shifts, right? Is how do we resolve these issues that we've begun to identify, and finding solutions, just like you brought up, are very much a needed part of our work plan. And to Jean's earlier point, when the community is asked questions many times and they're looking for information, those are places also we'll be able to really start to answer. Jan, anything you want to add to that?
Well, obviously, as Ken knows, I know a couple of things about how to deal with businesses during construction with all the work on University Avenue. And you're right. I mean, that'll be a lot of it. We'll have a lot of the learned lessons, the ones that worked on Green Line construction, and we'll bring those to this project as well. I like your part about the idea of winners and losers. Remember, we spent some time laying out stations for University Avenue. The community demanded we have more stations because they felt those additional station areas would generate additional investment at those corners. And to the end of anybody that knows what's going on along University Avenue today, they would see that, they would understand that, yeah, there is more. Right. There is more happening at those corners. But you also can't have a station every block, right? I mean, then it loses the effect of light rail. So where does it make sense? Where can we get the biggest bang for the buck? And then how do we protect the areas that don't have stations so that, number one, they're not impacted, and if they are impacted, that they're not left out there, and we still have good access both for vehicle traffic, foot traffic, and any other way people want to get around. So that'll become a big part of it as well. Sophia, you want me to go on to talk about some of the feedback we got from the cities?
Sounds like we're ready. And if others think of anything else to add to the discussion, we can take it back up before we jump into Terrence's presentation.
So we did get formal responses to the draft route modifications report from 5 cities in and along the corridor. Minneapolis, Robinsdale, Crystal, and Brooklyn Park, all that have direct access to the Blue Line extension, as well as the city of Maple Grove to the north and west of the alignment, all provided feedback. The letters and/or resolutions that we got from each of those cities have, you guys should have access to all of those. You can see their comments directly. As we put together some common themes from those, we put them on these particular slides. So some of the things that we heard from Brooklyn Park, we certainly heard that they support the route change from the BNSF rail corridor onto County Road 81. It only affects their city in a small area. Most of Brooklyn Park, as you know, is on the route is on West Broadway and continues to be on West Broadway from just south of Brooklyn Boulevard all the way up north of Highway 610. But in this new area, they've also identified a couple of things to keep in mind as we move forward, how we deal with pedestrian crossings and pedestrian access at 63rd continues to be an important piece. In the previous alignment, we had a skyway area that came from the park and ride at 63rd over the BNSF tracks to the station. Now the station will be in the middle of Highway 81. So how we get people there safely, they want to be sure is a consideration of ours. And of course it will be. They also are interested in continuing to maintain potential development opportunities in the flyover area where we kind of transition the LRT over northbound Highway 81 down onto private property that we're acquiring, and then behind the Target store there near Highway 81 and Brooklyn Boulevard. And so there will be some excess property in that area, and how redevelopment works in there is one of their concerns. That's a little bit about what we heard from Brooklyn Park. Moving to the south in Crystal, we really had two main issues that Crystal wants to be considered. Number one is how we deal with the lane configurations along Highway 81. As you know, in Crystal, most of the piece of Highway 81 is a 6-lane road with 3 lanes north and south, as well as turn lanes at the various intersections. We are looking to utilize some of those through lanes for LRT so as not to do a tremendous amount of additional widening in there. In doing that, the city wants to make sure that the traffic impacts will be addressed from taking 4 lanes, 6 lanes to 4 in some of those areas. And again, that'll be part of our ongoing work as we look at this, as well as their concern about what will be the end configuration at the Bass Lake Road, Highway 81 traffic intersection and station area where we have a station in Crystal. How will pedestrians get there? Will it be at grade? We've shown to this committee and others in the past the possibility of an interchange there where Highway 81 through traffic would go over Bass Lake Road and pedestrian movements would be at grade, separated from that higher speed through pedestrian traffic. Is that the right idea? Should this continue to all be at grade? What's the safest? What makes sense? That will be part of our ongoing work over the next number of years in both environmental study and engineering to look at those pieces. So those were their primary concerns in the city of Crystal. In the city of Robinsdale, they sent a resolution that identified a number of topics that they wanted to address. One of them was they felt in Robinsdale that while we call Area 2 the segment that goes from the Minneapolis-Robinsdale border through Robinsdale, Crystal, and up to the flyover in Brooklyn Park, we look at that all as one area because it's where we move from the railroad alignment to the Highway 81 Bottineau Boulevard alignment. They believe that north and south of Highway 100 are 2 distinct areas and ought to be treated differently in the report. North of Highway 100, where it's mostly Crystal, it's a 6-lane roadway. It's a different configuration than the downtown Robinsdale piece. They've asked us to consider Area 2 as an Area 2A and an Area 2B, and to look at the and evaluate the routes a little bit separately. We concur with that. We will do that as we move from draft report into the final route option report, and we'll talk about those two differently. The impacts are different. The lane configuration is different for the roadway. The impacts will be different, and we will identify them separately. The city also asked us, though, to consider a no-build option as part of the route selection report. And while a no-build option is viable, it's not viable in this process in terms of including it. What we're doing here is not trying to determine viability of what we should build and whether or not we can clear the environmental hurdles and identify it. In this particular case, we're identifying the proper route or the recommended route to move forward. When we do the environmental work associated with the selected route, we will have a no build versus a build in terms of environmental impacts. And so it will be addressed. It just won't be addressed in this process. It'll be addressed in the next steps as we look at the feasibility and environmental impacts of building this LRT line. Minneapolis provided us with a long list of comments that they are looking for additional information on to help guide the decision making between a Lowry and West Broadway route. Very good comments from them, very pertinent information. They want to make sure that we've addressed the various topics necessary and the various quantitative data to help guide that decision. Since the final report recommendation will make a recommendation between West Broadway and Lowry for this route, as we put it together, they want to make sure we've actually, have the data and the background to back that up. So it's a defensible position, both with policymakers and publicly as we get feedback. And so we're working with them now to help identify their thoughts, bring those together, get the data together, and make sure that we've got a sound judgment behind the preferred route that we want to move forward. And so we'll be working with the city of Minneapolis on that over the next number of weeks. And then, in case we haven't talked about it before, Maple Grove has now kind of knocked on the door and said, hey, this LRT thing seems kind of cool. While we're going, and we understand your route goes up in through Brooklyn Park on West Broadway, past North Hennepin Community College, and up north of Highway 610. Is there a possibility in the future that there may be a spur which goes either off of this blue line into Maple Grove, or a Maple Grove connection, if you will, that runs the LRT from Maple Grove over to Blue Line and then Blue Line into Minneapolis? How could that work? Can we start to think about how that might work, and what design considerations and design recommendations might you have for this Blue Line project that certainly doesn't preclude and maybe even starts to make available the idea of a spur into Maple Grove as well? And so we'll kind of address that topic in part of the final report. We're not going to be adding a spur into Maple Grove into this current project. That would send us all the way back to the beginning of the drawing board, but we certainly want to continue to think about how a spur into Maple Grove could work with the Blue Line project that we're bringing forward. So that's a kind of a fairly quick summary of the 5 levels of feedback that we received from our municipalities. So those are all very important topics to us. We want to bring the municipalities and their comments along with us. So we'll be addressing each of those as we move forward, and that'll be part of how we move the report forward as well. So questions, thoughts before we kind of saw about what the cities are telling us, and how we're addressing those before we kind of, Sophia wraps up how we're considering all the comments and what our next steps are.
Okay, I'll take that
Sophia,
as
take it away.
Take that as a cue to jump in. So we kind of think of the comments we received in kind of 2 types of buckets. One, the comments that are consistent with themes that we've previously heard. So that might be, in more recent engagement, or things that we've heard throughout the whole year. Things in a way that maybe had a chance to get incorporated into the draft route modification report. To Jean's earlier comment, that doesn't mean that we're ignoring those comments. In some ways, it's thinking about how we can strengthen or make clear responses to them, but also just noting that they're consistent with what we've been evaluating as we've gone through the process. And then there's all the comments that are the request on new information, right? So the draft route modification report did contain a lot of new information for folks. Well, folks came along with us on the process, and we didn't want any surprises. It was still seeing information packaged in a new way. So that's really where the staff is sinking our teeth into and making sure that we provide that information as we go into the next stages. Because the draft report did not contain a recommendation, we'll still make sure there's time for public comment on that recommendation. We always want to leave room that there's something that also needs to be considered. And so that's also our next step is with this next report. We'll still have a time to engage with community as we come to selecting a route and moving forward. So that's what to expect. That's what to expect from us. And with that, I'll pause and let there be any kind of additional conversation before I turn it over to see Terrence to do some anti-displacement updates. Maybe Jean, you read every single comment? Did we at least reflect it against the goals in a good way?
We still need answers, but the answer to your question is yes.
Okay, awesome. Sometimes I want to make sure that if we're hitting the mark, right? With the, and I might need. Yep, I actually need to pull up your slide deck to see Terrence. So give me if you want an intro. I just need 1 second.
Sure, yeah, thanks, Sophia. It's good to be with all of you tonight. Just hoping to give a little update on where we are with this anti-displacement work. Just kind of keep it all in the loose. It's not a huge update, where the research isn't done. Still working on that, though. I'll talk about that a little bit. And yeah, just hoping to make sure that everybody knows what's going on and what to expect and all those kind of good things. So good to be here. Sorry, Sophia, I didn't have a lot of content to burn through.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry. No worries.
I was having trouble with my network drive, so just got to get up the PowerPoint. Okay.
Well, right on. Thanks, Sophia. So jumping into it, I think the first thing we're going to talk about just sort of like some timeline updates and where we are. So the biggest thing is, we're right in the middle of interviews for anti-displacement working group members. We got quite a substantial number of applications, and we'll be interviewing about 50 people throughout this, which is more than we thought was going to happen. But it's a really good problem. I really want to thank Peggy Sue from this committee. I'm not sure if she's here tonight. I didn't think I saw her. But also Felicia Perry from the Business Advisory Committee, who have joined us in these interviews, and we'll be doing that through next week, February 11th. Really, really, really good group of folks. I'll be talking about this in a little bit more detail in a couple of slides. The hope is now that we'll have the first meeting, the orientation meeting in late February, so not one of those big Saturday meetings. A little bit delayed, but that's mostly just because of how many applications that we've got. So we just kind of had to have a robust process for interviewing folks. And but we'll have the orientation meeting in late February, or later this month. Sheesh, we're in February. So looking forward to that. Last time I talked.
The wrong thing.
Oh, what'd you say?
The wrong thing? Did I pull up the wrong thing?
No, that was the right thing.
Okay. Sorry. Sorry, 1 second.
No,
you can see that Sophia is brain dead.
No, it is all good. It is 7 o'clock at night. I know you've been on all day because I was in a meeting with you at 8:30 this morning. So I get it for sure. So one thing I talked about last time, we're not doing the month-to-month meeting thing for the anti-displacement working group, but instead of going to this sort of smaller meeting schedule, primarily centered around these big Saturdays or full day Saturday meetings, just to give y'all sort of an expectation of what that's headed towards. May is when we're thinking we'll have that first big Saturday meetings, which will be centered around lessons from the existing blue and green line light rail, including the blue line extension planning. So what's been happening over the past 10 years in here. September, we'll be talking about housing and cultural displacement. October, we'll be talking about business displacement. In February, we'll be talking about finalizing recommendations. All right, that's February 2023, not February of this month, of this year, or the month that we're in right now. And, so what I really want to sort of center around that. So we'll have these big Saturday meetings, but they're not the only time that which we'll be engaging the public around this project. Of course, I think, aspects of those big Saturday meetings will be public. Welcome all of you, of course, to be in those meetings. But it's also a good way to think about at what time we'll be talking about this stuff in general with the public, right? So when will we be talking about housing and cultural displacement in general around this project? Right, around that September and the month after, preceding and after about. So just to sort of give you sort of a frame of mind, and we'll be finalizing the details in more detail as the anti-displacement working group is onboarded, but this is just sort of a good way to think about when are we talking about what, when. Qualitative and quantitative research has begun. I'll be talking about that in just a little bit later on in the presentation. And to that last point of what I was just saying, we're planning overall outreach and engagement on the project around the full Saturday meeting timeline. So when can you expect us to come back to this group around any particular element, right around those same time frames? So going to, I just wanted to bring this slide up because I want to, once again, sort of reiterate the expectation that I want y'all to have for us, which is, that we have the anti-displacement working group, but that's not the only place that we should be having this conversation. In this group, along with the BAC and the other sort of official committees of the project aren't the only places, but it's how does this show up in community? And of course, all of you and a lot of folks are connected into different communities and constituencies. And, we really got to think about how do we partner with y'all in sort of like delivering the sort of digestible information that you could take to your communities, your family, your friends, the people that you're connected to really understand this project. But it's also, even more than from the perspective of understanding, say, the research, it's about, how are y'all connected into the different qualitative research in particular, so people showing up in the context of interviews and focus groups and those different sort of things, but also, having open houses and other aspects like that. So we had a great conversation, I thought, last Friday with the project team. But I mean, by that means Sophia and Kathy and Joan and Dan, about really syncing, this organizing or engagement from the project as a whole with this, right? I'm sure when y'all are talking about alignment, people are asking about anti-displacement, and surely it'll be the case for us too. And so, we want to build this expectation and build this program out that, it's not just talking to the anti-displacement working group, but it's talking to the community as a whole. Right, and so co-developing the expanded research agenda, convening community and government stakeholders, convening a process to develop the recommendations, right, and working with all the cities is certainly part of the plan. And so what I'm hoping that y'all really think about, you don't have to give me the feedback today, is how do you want this work to show up in the communities that y'all are connected to, right? And I think it can look like a lot of different things. I think culturally, it can look like a lot of different things. We know not everybody wants to read a research report or even see a PowerPoint or even go to a large open house meeting. We're just hoping that y'all think about making sure that we're getting to all the nooks and crannies of connecting to community and just sort of prepping those expectations or those activities. And so just for y'all to really think about what does this project need to look like getting into community? And I think we're open to that. We want to build towards that. I'm asking the question really early, knowing that these things are much later on so that we can actually, consequentially build towards that. Going to the next slide, you can probably just jump 2 slides. So on the anti-displacement working group, as I said, we're interviewing about 50 candidates. There is representation from the full corridor, very diverse racially, very diverse in age, business owners, folks from community organizations, folks from not community organizations. There is some light representation from Crystal. So I think that's one thing that we're going to be monitoring. So you might see, even another call from some targeted groups if, say, the interviews don't work out. But largely, the candidates are amazing. Like, I think it's going to be really difficult for us to make a decision in this context. I don't think, is Peggy Sue here? Peggy Sue's not here. Okay. But yeah, I was just gonna have her see if she wanted to comment on the interviews if she was. All stars, all I can really say. So I think y'all will be really happy with that group, hopefully, and looking forward to identifying them in detail. We said this is gonna be 21 members, but I can see easily growing to 25 members. Oops. Well, I'm gonna pause for a second. My daughter's losing it in the background. Sorry, it's bedtime over here, and not so thick walls. All right, I'm sorry, y'all. Work from home. Sorry about that. Work from home life, right? So part of this is identifying philanthropic representatives for the group. I think I'm just gonna go hide out in the closet. I don't know how loud this is for everybody, but I'm just gonna hide in the closet for a second, just so y'all don't have to hear.
We can't hear it at all. Don't worry.
You can't?
No, WebEx filters out background noise.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, I'll just stand in the closet anyways, just in case. So we're looking for philanthropic representatives as well for part of this work, and so I'm just naming the organizations or the philanthropic organizations that we're sort of targeting in this work. So the Phillips and Minneapolis Foundation, McKnight Foundation, Northside Funders Group, Headwaters. Each of them represent sort of different interests, different sort of I don't know, what can I say? Focuses in their different grant areas. Some of them is in sort of people power, like Headwaters really focuses on organizing leadership. Right, McKnight's really focused on like equity and does a lot of different things. Minneapolis Foundation, Phillips, they all just have a different focus, businesses and those different sort of things. And so just wanted to name to y'all those groups that we're thinking about. And then, the governments are also identifying their representatives and their internal working groups as well. If you remember that from our last presentation, but they'll sit, of course, on this group as well, and developing their own internal groups to sort of process the information that we're getting to. To the research plan, the things that are highlighted in green are the things that we're basically we're queuing up or we're starting. So I just wanted to give folks an update on where we are with that, right? So the reviewing the best practices in anti-displacement policy locally and nationally. Starting that case study for the existing blue and green lines, knowing that that's the first full Saturday meeting. And then going for a thorough baseline study of the Blue Line Extension Corridor and the needs assessment for the investment in the corridor. So all those things are underway. Of course, I'm not reporting back on those things, but just so to let y'all know what we're up to. So also to think about and to make sure, like, what are your research questions within that? Of course, we're still filling out that research agenda with community. Of course, a big litmus point is when or litmus test is when we meet with the Anti-Displacement Working Group for the first time later this month to solidify that research agenda. So think about those things. Again, you don't need to say anything to me today, but just to know how we're moving, still building, and still opportunity for y'all to really help shape, or in this context, the questions that you have that are pertinent to y'all being able to make a recommendation around anti-displacement policy programs and investment. Still time to shape those research questions. So I just wanted to, so I've been saying, giving a shout out to Kathy. She developed this slide, which I think is just really beautiful. So good work, Kathy. But I think this is just a good way. I loved how she thought about this, how the work that we're doing is not just this theoretical exercise for the purpose of understanding displacement, but rather it's, of course, again, to get to those practical policy programs and investments that are consequential to addressing potential harm in this community, and more importantly, to make sure that the Blue Line extension is beneficial to community, right? And so I think she had really good thinking on This was the it's not the Public Works Steering Committee, it's the
Community Works Steering.
Community Works. One day I'll remember that, I promise, Kathy. Community Works Steering Committee, some of their programmatic goals, so expanding wealth building opportunities, creating sustainable community vision development, increasing access to skills for sustaining jobs, and amplifying success and vibrancy of cultural and community assets. And I thought that's a brilliant way to think about it, about each of those 4 different places where we are really focusing on in those full Saturday meetings and how they might show up consequentially towards those goals. Again, this is the place that we're trying to get to. This not a theoretical exercise, but we want to consequentially shape the things that y'all in community really care about. So just wanted to share that. I think that's the last slide. So, I think really just giving y'all an update where we are. We're in that building out process of this project. Loving the interviews and the folks who are stepping up to do that. So yeah, but with that, if y'all have any questions, comments, concerns, praises, any of those good things, this is y'all's time.
Well, we can forget the praises, but I have a few questions.
Fair enough.
No surprise there. Could you comment on the knowledge level of the folks you've been talking to so far?
In the interviews, you're saying?
No, I'm talking about regular community people.
I'm not sure what you mean by regulars, like as we're talking, like anybody who just gets in contact with
For
us.
the most part, I mean, I'm assuming, and you can correct me if that's not a correct assumption, that the people you're interviewing have a certain level of knowledge or information about the blue line extension.
Well, I mean, I think everybody has an interest in the blue line extension, but I would say, the knowledge level, if you're speaking about anti-displacement or just about the project as a whole, either way, I think the knowledge already in the place really, really varies. We've had anything from planners, who do that as their formal job, who've been interested in, we've interviewed, to folks who are just interested because, their community or business association or whatever wanted somebody to be part of this conversation, but didn't really come with a lot of pre-existing knowledge. So it spanned quite widely. And then, a lot of these folks, I haven't heard or seen as names that have popped up in this project before. So I think we got a pretty wide cast of folks who come from varying places.
Hey, Terrence, could I maybe provide a clarity too in
Sure.
the question? Is that the folks that they're interviewing are applicants, so people that submitted applications to be on the anti-displacement table.
Sure.
So in a sense, Kira's doing their due diligence to make sure that the people that are placed at the table will really stay very involved, in the process, and be a great reflection of the community. So sifting through many applications to make sure that community is well represented at the table, and just noting too that while Peggy Sue's not here, both herself and a member of the BAC are in the interviews with them, really doing really in-depth work to make sure that we have a great working group in place. So I just want to make sure that we're not thinking he's random reaching out, right? It's responding to those that applied, and we had a very robust process Kira had a very robust process to make sure the word got out for that application. So just wanted to add that as well.
When you say robust, how many people applied?
We got just under 70 applications.
So it's not many. Okay.
I think that's quite a bit, actually, in my experience. Yeah.
I mean, this is a large project that impacts thousands. So, okay. And are there anything now about any action items that you can take prior to your meeting schedule?
Any action items prior to our meeting schedule?
Yes.
Like what are you thinking?
Oh, I'm thinking we know that displacement is going to be an issue. Are you talking with any real estate professionals? Are you talking with owners of properties? Are you quantifying any possibilities for temporary locations for businesses? Those kind of things.
Are you asking in the context of the research project, like as like a research entity? Then the answer is yes. You know, preceding all those meetings is both the quantitative and the qualitative study, which includes a number of those things that you just mentioned, not the last part, like the finding places for relocation, but you know, some of the members have talked about that is a consideration that we really, or some of the applicants have talked about that it is a consideration that we consider, which I think is a good one. I'm not sure if that will happen before these meetings, at least the first one. But a business scan, an environmental scan is what we call it as a research within the context of the research process is happening. And, there's gonna be lots of interviews, focus groups, and those different sort of things, talking to folks. And yeah, those things are beginning, this month.
Right, I know it's a lot of talking. I know that members of the community met with the city of Minneapolis the other day. And one of the concerns that came out is that there's no action items, that there's nothing happening right now. So I'm wondering if that's a responsibility of the anti-displacement group, or is that responsibility lie with the project office or with some other entity?
Oh,
I'm sorry, action items. I don't know. Maybe Sophia or somebody can help clarify.
Yeah.
I'm not sure exactly what you're asking.
let me take that. I don't think we want to. Kira is doing an amazing job getting going, right? And we have to recognize that you can't just snap your fingers and produce results. It takes time to work with the community and build your group and begin research. And see, Terrence has been here a few times, kind of outlining their work agenda, and even tonight, kind of giving an update on where they are and getting their group together. And there's we got to meet a lot of the team on Friday, and they have a very big team that'll do a whole bunch of work. We also just need to recognize it takes more than 5 minutes, right? So it's getting going. Of course, the project team wishes that you could have all the answers right away. We've known that displacement has been a big concern for the community throughout the process, and it's getting going. It's just going to take a little bit of time, but just know that the project staff is very committed to this process, and we have both Hennepin County and Met Council that are very committed to this process. And because I'm a little bit tired and I kind of forgot at the beginning of the meeting, we also had, I was going to give the announcement and I forgot. We also had Governor Walz earlier in the week as part of his budget request give about $200 million to the Blue Line project. Obviously, that still needs to go through the legislature, but part of why, and then his reasons for why that was included in the project was part of this equity lens, right? And serving these communities in North Minneapolis and our northwestern suburbs. So I would say we even have a vote of confidence at the state level of this good work that is beginning. And I see Dan coming on camera, so feel free to add to that.
No, I think that's great, Sophia.
That's not what I was going to say. And for you to say that it takes more than 5 minutes, I've been on this project more than 6 years, so that's a little bit more than 5 minutes. And we're talking about action items. There are things that can be done now, so we don't have to wait until the end of the displacement process. There are certain things we know about displacement throughout this group. So I think it's a little disingenuous for you to say that we're looking for something to happen in 5 minutes.
Hey, Terrence?
We definitely want to be as responsive as possible. And it is also don't want to, all I was trying to do is reflect that they need time to actually do work and get things behind them. It does take time, and they're getting going.
Terrence, I have a question for you. This is Gene. So, man, you got a big project here. This is huge. So here's my question. All these 70 people that you're talking to, okay, these people, are you doing a balance between emotion and facts? Because we need a good mix of both, but not one-sided, this or that side, whatever it should be, so we can get a balanced feedback of what really is on the minds of the people, the residents in the area. Have you thought about that?
Yeah, so what I hear from you when you say emotion and facts, you mean you're talking about the why people are interested in participating in the anti-displacement working group. Yeah?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, the questions that we're asking in the interview are sussing out, their worldview, their perspective, their community connections,
Okay.
what they need to get out of this group in order to make the recommendations. Yeah, I mean, I think we're kind of assessing kind of a broad range of like how they're coming to this table. And of course, I think we'll, make a decision on ultimately who ends up as those 21 members, 21 plus members, whatever it ends up being, balancing the group across a number of different factors, right? So I don't know. I don't think you could just distill it down to those two factors of, facts and, emotions. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a number of things that we need to balance when we're putting that group together. Again, a big part of, to the point about facts, a big part of this effort is us having a large body of original research, right? Which will, in some ways, like, what is the baseline? What are we actually starting from? Like, not just from I assume this is happening, but this is what the data is telling us, both quantitative and qualitative. And so that will be sort of the level setting in the room as we head towards, recommendations. But yeah, I mean, we're looking at a balance for the group amongst, a number of different characteristics. And yeah, emotions, maybe that shows up in the form of like, what's your relationship to the project? What have you done so far? What have you not done so far? What are your expectations across it? We're certainly sussing out in the interviews for sure.
And I want to just recognize, Catherine's comments and her passion in what she's saying here, because I mean, obviously, this is a critical issue and it's a critical piece of moving the project forward. We don't want to take forever to get this work done, but we also want to get it right. And so to that end, it's frustrating. There are things, and we are hoping that it isn't a 3-year study that's going to recommend a book that goes on a shelf, and then we can take a look at it and say, oh, did we do any of those things or did we not? We think there are things that hopefully can be identified early by the anti-displacement working group that can get out there and that we can start to implement quickly. Real action items, Catherine, on real topics that we can start to implement early. And then there's going to be some that are going to take time, and they're going to take policy level changes, and they're going to take decision makers by elected officials at various entities, and they're going to take lobbying by the community, and they're going to take that kind of work. And those might not be simple and right off the top. And so we need to pay attention to both, and we need to get this working group formed, get the research work underway, and get some low-hanging fruit picked and implemented and start to move forward. And we're going to push for that at the county and Met Council. And I know that Terrence and his team will do that. But we also don't want to be so fast to move forward that we have failures out of the start. We want to have positive results, and we want to make this thing work. So
I get that. No, I appreciate that, Dan. And I mean, we've had that discussion before. And I recognize that there are going to be some things that do take time. But I mean, this isn't like some mysterious subject. I mean, we all have some experience or know something about displacement. So to say we're starting from zero is a little interesting.
We're not. You're right. We're not. Obviously, we got a whole body of work from Central Corridor that we know about and that we can use. We have a body of work from other transportation projects that we've done in the region and around the country. So we are starting from zero. At the same time, we're also trying to get our hands around just where is this route going to get built. And so the project is working on that. The community anti-displacement working group is coming together, and we hope and can really see success on both of those as we move forward. And we'll continue to do that as we go.
And I just have one last point. Have you responded to the City of Minneapolis letter of concern, a response to your feedback request? I mean, your generic feedback request, community feedback. So they sent a letter stating their concerns, and they shared that with the community group that met with them the other day.
And Catherine, to that end, yes, we are working with them every week. We're going through all the elements in their letter. We're getting that feedback pulled to get that feedback. We're getting those data, the facts, the pieces. We're getting all that pulled together so that we can provide solid ground on which to stand on a recommendation for a route. And so they've been good partners with us. We've been working with them closely, and we'll continue to do that.
Right. One of their primary concerns or requests was that you slow down the process. Is that something that's under consideration as well?
Yes. What they've said is, we've got a timeline that we've laid out, and they've said, we don't know if that timeline is going to exactly match how we need to get our policymakers involved and work through that. And so, yes, that will be taken in. We just had our own Met Council Hennepin County policymaker meeting today. We shared that information with them, and we said we need to bring Minneapolis along. If you remember our colleague Sam O'Connell saying, moving at the speed of trust. And so this isn't a race, right? We need to make sure that we're moving forward at the right time. I don't always think of that as slowing down as much as I think of it as doing the work and getting the people, bringing them along with us in the proper time frame. And if that takes longer, it's going to take longer, and that is what it'll be.
And both are an example of places that we know we need to make commitments or have the base of commitments, and it's really diving into the work. So whether that's providing additional information for the city of Minneapolis, and I mean both the community and city staff, to really feel like we can make a decision and move forward on the route selection, or thinking about programs that could be part of the anti-displacement work. Like we know that we need strong construction support and have a basis of understanding, and see Terrence's work might bear fruit on how to build that up further. But then there's also these things that we don't know, and that we can do a lot more deeper dive into. And so that's kind of what we're expanding on. There's like what can be done in this moment, and then what will continue through the project, whether it's in route selection or in making sure that we have all the programs around the development of LRT that we need. Catherine, if I cut you off at all, did you have any last thoughts or comment, or not last, any additional thoughts or comments?
Not on that. I appreciate see Terrence's update, and definitely Dan's comments about how you're moving forward and addressing the city of Minneapolis concerns. So,
yeah, it's really important that we are in partnership with the city, and very committed to that. I always feel like I cut people off a little bit on the virtual lag sometimes. So I don't mean to, folks.
Catherine, always good to hear from you. Always good to hear from you.
Any other thoughts for C. Terrence? Okay.
Can we call it a night, folks?
Yeah,
Gene, can we call it a night, Gene? Chair?
Hold on, Dan. One more thing. Talking about next meeting.
A couple more hours, man. A couple more hours.
Okay. All right.
I won't pull up the slide, but it can be verbal. But our next meeting, would be in March, that first week of March, and kind of as Catherine alluded to, we were planning more to have a report later in March. It might take us a little bit more time than that. So anticipating now that we would just cancel our March meeting so that we have time to kind of get the report together, and then finding a time in April. But just want to make sure it's okay with the committee that likely we would cancel our March gathering.
We'll see Terrence will have met then. Sophia, I apologize if I don't remember the date.
It'll be very close, Catherine. How dates are working out is that they might have, but he wouldn't necessarily have turnaround time to, kind of prepare an update. just because, you know, it's even getting, you know, the community together. There's also getting governments to respond. So if there's any delay, we might not have the time to turn around and update right away.
Okay. April works.
Okay. Well, Jean, as our new co-chair, I'll turn it over to you to make the final call of the night and ask for the committee to adjourn.
Are there any additional questions, concerns, opinions? This meeting's adjourned.
Good night, all. Wonderful to see you.
Thank you.
Have a good night, everyone.
Have a good night, everyone.